Hey there. We hope everyone's enjoying lunch, and we also want to welcome those online with us as well. And I selfishly said this statement to many of our board members this morning in our board of directors meeting that I was just as excited about this next presentation as was Dr. Todd Whitaker being here. And we are just so blessed and so fortunate to have one of the best superintendents, not only in our Commonwealth, but in our nation with us today. A gentleman that has been a teacher, he's been a principal, he's been a coach, he's been an assistant superintendent, a superintendent, 30 years in education, and the past 14 years as school superintendent at Boyle County schools. And many of you know this gentleman, and as great as he is an educator, as great as he is a school superintendent, he's an even better person, human being, and friend. And just so thankful for this guy. And I promise you, selfishly, for our superintendents watching, the information that he's going to be sharing with you shortly will be the framework or the bones or the skeleton for your administrative retreat this summer. And once he starts presenting, you'll understand what we're talking about. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Mr. Mike LaFavers.
Jerry knows how to put on the pressure, so appreciate that. Jerry Green, 18 years as superintendent in Pikeville, and just admired him. I remember in 2010, I was a new superintendent, and we were at a training at KDE. They were deciding on selecting ACT to be part of the accountability system. I guess they can blame you and I for that being part of it ever since. But we were talking during a break, and you said curriculum had been changing. It was 4.0 to 4.1, and different curriculum every year or two. And you said, well, what we're doing in Pikeville is we're taking the AP standards all the way down to third grade. And I thought, man, what a forward thinker. I was brand new to the superintendency. And just to get that time with you, I appreciated it. And since then, learned a lot from you. And to get to be at your co-op today means a lot to me. And I want you all to know, school superintendents, the ones online, as well as the ones here, any school district you represent, Jerry Green brags about your school districts to me and others all the time. He's proud of the work that's happening in his co-op. He's proud of the work that the districts are doing that are part of this co-op as well. So again, I'm just lucky to be here and just thankful for the opportunity. I want to start out by saying during my 14 years as school superintendent, the job's gotten tougher. I thought it would get easier. And maybe in some ways it has, but in many ways it's gotten more difficult, not just to be a superintendent, but to be an educator, right? To be a teacher, to be a principal, to work at a central office, to work at a co-op, to work for a state agency, whoever you represent today, the job's gotten more difficult. And not to make excuses, because we're not excuse makers as educators. It's not what we are, but we're going to introduce the elephant in the room. I want us to talk about, just for a second, what's made the job more difficult. Let's just kind of own it, talk about it, mention the facts, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about what can we do, because there are things that are beyond our control, but what we're going to talk about today are the things that are within our control. But first, let's talk about what's made the job become more difficult over the last decade plus. Who's got an idea for me? Social media. I think that's 100%. Not just because when someone's got a complaint, they feel like they're kind of behind the veil, right? They can say whatever they want to say. They wouldn't say it to your face. But then also what it's doing to our students, right? And that leads me into one that I just want to mention is just the mental health aspect. How many of you all are seeing some changes there in your districts in terms of mental health? For our students, when I became superintendent, we're a school district of 2,800 kids, and we had 7 counselors. Today we have 9, 2 mental health therapists, and we have agreements with all kinds of agencies. We're spending over $300,000 more on mental health for our kids than we were 14 years ago. How many of you are experiencing something similar to that in your districts, right? And now something I'm starting to notice is our staff. since the pandemic, I mean, I know people have had anxiety, depression, other things going on, but it didn't come to the level of the superintendent, but it is now. Like, I'm becoming aware, and I see that y'all are nodding your heads. You're experiencing that as well. What else are some of the challenges that are making the jobs more difficult that we're experiencing, that we're seeing? I'll give you one as you're starting to think about it. How many of you are starting to see enrollment decline, attendance percentage decline, homeschools go up? Parents are going homeschool. I'm seeing people nod their heads on that, right? So we're experiencing, well, I think in the state of Kentucky, Jim Flynn sent me something recently, 38,000 fewer students than before the pandemic. 143 districts have lost kids. That's making our jobs more difficult, right? When homeschool seems like such an easy option to a lot of families. What are some of the other challenges we're facing that are making the jobs more difficult in the last few years? Yes. Teacher shortages. In fact, I would say not just teacher, but human resource shortages, custodians, bus drivers, but teachers for sure, right? How many of your districts, or you know of districts that haven't filled all their teaching positions, and here we are at the end of March? I'm seeing some nods of heads on that. So you're exactly right. The teacher shortage has made the job more difficult, and there's nothing indicating that's going to get fixed quickly, is there? I mean, I'll tell you a cool idea I saw. Nelson County Schools, first in the state, to where you can get your first 2 years of your teacher prep program in high school. You go to Western Kentucky University, do 2 years, and then at age 20, you're ready to be a teacher, right? And they're the first to do that. I think you'll start seeing ideas like that grow across Kentucky. That was just announced like yesterday or day before. That's a brand new idea. Find someone in your area, a college, university, who'll do that with you, because we've got to grow our own teachers. They've got to come from within our own districts. What's something else that's made the job more difficult? Yes, sir. Family unit's not the same. I think we would agree with that 100%. And of course, that's led to more poverty. I mean, in my district, when I came in, 35% poverty rate. Today is 53. And so I think we're all seeing those numbers change and those numbers grow. And as a result, the kids walk in the building, their needs are different as well. We'll do a couple more, then we'll move on to what we can actually do about it. I'll give you one while you're thinking. When I became superintendent, you rarely saw divided boards. It was very rare. You might have one board member that the superintendent would say, yeah, a little hard to work with. Now what I hear them say is it can be 2, it can be 3. I mean, a lot of 3-2 boards. That is definitely different for a school superintendent, different for a school district when you have a 3-2 board, right? Anything else that's weighing on us, making the jobs tougher? It's been like there's been a little bit of an attack on the education profession, right? She said a lack of respect. I agree with that 100%. And so, you know, we don't have full control over being respected, but hopefully some of the things I'm going to talk to you about today will help us regain that respect, because a lot of it is within our control. All right, so here's kind of how I've broken this down. When you see the word external and internal, external will be the things people outside of our school buildings, what they see and how they experience us and what their opinions about us are driven by. The internal are the things we work on behind the scenes, and people don't really know what it is or what we're doing, but it kind of frames who we are, right? So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the external today, but I just want to mention those because they're important. I want to spend the time on the internal aspects, and that's where we're going to focus. But let me hit these external ones real quick, because I do think they matter. You know, we've mentioned today, as far as some of the challenges, we've talked about, I don't even know if we talked about the fact that money's drying up, right? So we go from, with fewer kids, it's going to drive fewer dollars to us. because we're experiencing fewer kids in most districts in Kentucky. ESSER funds came to us, which was great, highly restricted, and they're starting to dwindle, and there's a deadline on them. Another financial thing that's hit us is the bonding mechanisms have not changed. A nickel's a nickel, right? But it's now $450 a square foot to build something. And, you know, I built a middle school. We haven't even done the last pay app on it for $230. We've been in that building for 2 years. So in 2 years, 3 years time, it's almost costing double the amount of money, but the laws and the bonding mechanisms haven't changed. So, you know, we have issues with attracting students to our district, with instilling confidence in our tax base. Parents, as you all said, having respect for us in terms of believing that we're the best avenue for their children. All these things can be struggles for us. Well, when you look at these external factors, the first one is your buildings and grounds. I'll never forget, a few years ago, we had some families who were one from Arkansas and one from Virginia, and I saw them both on campus during the summer. They were deciding which district to land in. They could land, you know, they could buy a house in 4 or 5 districts based on where the husband and wife were working. And so the one from Arkansas said, yeah, we ended up in Boyle. I said, well, what made you decide that? She said, well, we couldn't get into schools because it was 1st of July, but your grounds looked like a golf course. How did you all do that? And I said, well, we hired a golf course superintendent, which is a true story. That is what we did. And I'm telling you, it makes a difference. You think about it, how many people are paying taxes in your communities and they never walk in your school buildings, but they see your grounds. When they go to a football game, they see your grounds, right? When they drive by on the road, they see your grounds. It makes a difference to the taxpayers and how they view how their money's being spent if your grounds look pristine. And so I would encourage you to take a little bit of time, maybe put some resources into making those grounds look as good as possible. Also, your buildings. When people go to your basketball games, when they go to your graduation, when they come to the parent-teacher night, they're walking in. They may not see all the classrooms. They see your lobby. They see your gym. They go into your bathrooms. How clean are they? That makes a difference for people who are paying taxes. It makes a difference for parents who are deciding where their kids are going to go to school. The second external factor is events execution. So anytime you have an event on campus, it'd be a football game. We had Friday this big flawlessly because people were developing an impression of us as a school district. And while a lot of these things, these people will never be in our classrooms, but they have some opinions about us, about how our classrooms function based on what they see on our grounds, what they see in our buildings, how we pull off events. The third one, you mentioned social media and our district website. So I imagine you have someone who's managing that, but I would want that data periodically. You want more people coming to Twitter to get news from you. Facebook, you want to know what those engagement numbers are. You want to know why they're driven to Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, your website. What are they going looking for? And you want to make that as easy for them to find, and you want to make sure that what they're coming for, you are giving them, right? Because they use our website differently than they use Twitter, differently than they use Facebook. We need to know why they're going to those places, and we need to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward in all of those different digital platforms. And the last one is program packaging. I was at KSBA, probably many of you were as well, and I was talking to the Union County superintendent, and she was talking about the wrestling program they have. And like in 60 seconds, she described just an unbelievable program, right? And I bet most of you in here have something in your district you're super proud of. Let's just check that out real quick. Like, Ralph, what are you super proud of in your district?
We can go in one school, one elementary,
It-
same day.
yeah.
Same thing.
That's awesome. So curriculum alignment, doesn't matter what elementary school a child is in, you can say to the parents, the curriculum is going to be the same. The pacing is probably almost the same, right? So he's done that beautifully, right? And how about you? What are you proud of in your district?
We built a soccer program that's bar none in South District. We're very excited about the possibility.
And that's awesome. You got a soccer program, bar none. And so if you said to me, here's why our soccer program is so great, what's happening there? What's making that soccer program work?
Great education, the super coach, put a lot of in the infrastructure system.
That's almost a blueprint for any program, isn't it? So see, what we're saying here is once you have something you're good at, typically if it's something you're good at, the details have been worked out. Like you've worked out all the details to make that soccer program great, all the details to make your curriculum alignment great. The next step is to communicate that to the stakeholders, because when you communicate to the stakeholders that this thing, here's what makes this thing work. If you build it and communicate it, they will come, right? And so that works whether you're talking about soccer, whether you're talking about curriculum. You have to build something, think through all the details, and then communicate it. Let me give you a perfect example. It could be something you don't have yet. Yes, sir. Would you? Oh, I'm sorry. It could be something you don't have yet that you want to be great. In Boyle, we've never been really good at the arts. Like that was never been our thing, but we wanted it to be. So when we did our last project, we had a chance to build a performing arts theater onto the school that we built. And it's a true performing arts theater. It's got a fly loft. It's got an orchestra pit, seats 500. It's really nice. And the day we cut the ribbon, we also announced the Boyle County Arts Academy. We added a director. We added a chorus teacher, a drama teacher, a dance teacher, bought all the kids' t-shirts, had auditions. 300 kids showed up wanting to audition because they felt the energy. The parents felt the energy. People moved into our community to be in the Arts Academy. And we had auditions. 200 kids made the first round. The second round, we added another 100. We got 300 kids in a district of 2,800. Over 10% of our population are in the Arts Academy. It's what it is you're in your regular school half a day, then you go to the Arts Academy the second half of the day. Is how it works. We weren't good at the arts, but we wanted to be. And so what we did was we got all the details sorted out. We put the money to it, the funds to it, because I guarantee your soccer program, between the boosters and what you all are doing, you all probably have committed to it. And I'll guarantee you your curriculum process, you put some money to that. If you just think about the PD time for your teachers alone, right? When you have the details worked out, you put the money to it, and then you communicate to the stakeholders, you create energy. See, that's the beautiful thing that we can do as school leaders. We can create energy in our community. And you can create energy about something that's already good or something you want to be good. You have the power to do either one. And when you do that, the stakeholders see it and they're driven by it. So those are 4 things that our taxpayers see, know about, feel, our parents, our kids as well. And we want to be sharp on those 4. But today we're here to talk about the internal aspects. And so I'm going to switch over to that. Anything anybody wants to mention on the external factors first before I move on? Anything else there? All right, here we go. So we're going to do the 4 internal factors that you control that will create the trajectory you're wanting in your school system. And the first one is student-centered versus adult-centered. And what I can tell you is I've been in school administration in Boyle for 20 years. And in those 20 years, every school in my district at some point has had a little, I call it a bout of adult-centeredness, right? They've gotten stuck in that, mired in adult-centeredness for a period of time. In fact, I've got one that's struggling with that just a little bit now. And so it happens to all of us. And you never get there. Like you think, well, we've arrived. You don't arrive at being student-centered. It's something you have to constantly pay attention to. It's like a good marriage, right? You don't arrive to have a good marriage. You have to work at a good marriage the entire time. And that's the way it works here. If you want to be student-centered, if you want every school in your district to be student-centered, you have to work at it. And what I found is, the next couple slides will show you, I found 4 indicators that you have an adult-centered school. And I'm going to show those to you. And it's based on my experiences in Boyle, watching schools become adult-centered and then working their way out of it. And then another one becomes adult-centered and they got to work their way out of it, right? I'm going to show you that. And what I'm going to say to you today is, you can't have a great school system. And I think we all know this, if you're not student-centered. If the adults are more worried about themselves than they are the kids, you can't be great. So let me show you the first. Here's how you know you've got an adult-centered school. The first factor is bad data. Now, we use MAP. We switched over to iReady this year. How many of you are using MAP or iReady, one or the other? Got everybody MAP or iReady? Probably almost everybody in the room. Is there some other system people are using? Is it mostly MAP and iReady? That's a great one, you know, because I think it's pure data. It's even pure data, in my opinion, than the end of the year accountability testing. Nothing wrong with that end of the year accountability testing, but you get that data like 3-4 months later. And so it's kind of an autopsy. And we don't need that. We need a checkup, not an autopsy, right? And so that's a good place to look. If you start seeing your MAP data, your iReady data trending down at a school, red flag. It could be that the intermediate at one of your elementary schools is trending up, but the primary is trending down. Well, then you may have a primary problem. You may have your primaries becoming adult-centered and your intermediates not. That's possible too. But I would look at that data, and I would look at it. I would want to see trends, right? So I want to know, number one, I would want to follow a group of kids the entire time. Follow the kids. What are those kids doing when you follow them throughout K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And then I would want to follow a grade level. What's happening in 3rd grade as compared to 2nd? What's happening year after year? And then I want to see my gaps. I want to see kids with IEPs. I want to see kids who are free reduced lunch. I want to see the same kind of trend data with them. If you start seeing data problems with your norm reference test, that's a red flag. ACT, you know, if you see ACT dropping, they may say to you, well, it's not as good a group of kids. I mean, don't buy that. I don't ever buy that. That's an excuse I'm not buying. So if you start seeing a couple of years of bad ACT, if you see the number of kids taking advanced placement exams going down, the number of kids enrolled in dual credit going down, you need to have people on your teams bringing you data. And if you see any of the academic data going down, it's a red flag. It doesn't mean they're adult-centered, but it means you've got one red flag. Another one is behavior data. If you analyze Infinite Campus behavior data and you're starting to see, it could be that you're seeing more bullying and harassment or an alarmingly less of that, right? So the data is going to tell you a story. What's happening with the number of office referrals? How many suspensions are you seeing? If you're seeing a lot more suspensions in your schools, it's a red flag. Now, I know a lot of us don't measure customer service. It's a good thing to measure. We do it in Boyle periodically. I would encourage you to find ways to measure that. If the people you're serving are communicating to you that the offices in the buildings are not warm or not inviting or not helpful, could be a sign that it's a red flag, right? You've got to have a way to measure that. But if you don't, then you're probably looking at anecdotal evidence, like I'm getting more complaints about this school's front office, which, you know, you all know what you're getting. Financial. Show me an adult-centered district. I'll show you one that's probably running close to that 2.5%, right? Because you spend money differently. If you're adult-centered, you spend money differently than if you're kid-centered. And you'll end up probably not doing the 3 bids as often because maybe, you know, one of the guys giving you the first bid, right? And so if you start seeing, if you walk into a district and there's some financial issues, I know we've got a lot of financial things hitting us right now, but if you see that, it's a red flag. Any kind of safety issues, and then the physical building. I have my director of operations. I have him once a month do a tour of all the schools with the custodian and the principal, give me a report on what he's seeing in terms of what the physical building looks like. And if I see that data trending poorly, it's a red flag. You can also look at your bus garage. Lots of different ways to look at your bus garage. Behavior referrals coming off the buses. You can look at how much you're spending on transmissions, et cetera, right? There's all kinds of data from the bus garage that can tell you, are they kid-centric? But we need to all, as school leaders, be data-driven. We need to have people in the district that's giving us this data so we can look at it together. And we got to be looking for these red flags. That's the first sign that you're adult-centered. Here's the second one. Your staff make excuses. Have you heard this one before? It's the central office's fault. Anybody heard that? Am I the only one that's had that? I think a few others have had that. You know, and so when you have that, they want to blame it on the central office, you know. And when you have that, they're not grasping or fully appreciating the power they have over their own destiny. You know, it's a great sign that you've got an adult-centered school. It's the parents' fault. It's the students' fault. Blaming the kids. This is a tough group of kids, not a good group of kids. It's the building leader's fault. It's my coworker's fault. It's society's fault. There's actually in one of my football locker room somebody put a sign over in one of the bathrooms that said, it's society's fault right over top of it. It's the weirdest thing. But this is what people do. They look for, there's all kinds of excuses, all kinds of reasons that it's not me. It's not us. It's not our team. It's not the math teachers. It's not this 7th grade team. It's got to be somebody else, right? That's the second sign. The third sign is the staff are miserable. You have an adult-centered school, the staff want to get out there. They don't realize they're creating their own environment. They're miserable. When I was a kid and I was having a bad day or I was unhappy, my mom would say, you need to go do something for somebody else. So I knew that if I'm having a bad day, don't let my mom know because I'm going to end up having to go do something for somebody else. So that's the same thing with our staff. When you get to where you're mostly worried about you end up miserable. When you go into a school that's worried about the kids are the center of the school, the staff, they're not miserable. They're energized, they're happy, they're satisfied, they love their work. It's the opposite. But you go into an adult-centered school, you got miserable teachers. If you've got in your district miserable teachers, you've got an adult-centered school. It's almost a guaranteed one-to-one correlation. And the last one is eventually, you know, if you don't deal with it from the central office as a school superintendent, if you don't help the principal deal with it, eventually the leader will become complicit in it as well. And then it's really hard to turn because once the leader is also adult-centered of that school, you know, it's that John Maxwell law of the lid. Once that lid is about the adults, then you, as the leader in the district, are going to have a hard time flipping that school back to being kid-centric. So those are the 4: bad data, excuse making, you've got a miserable staff, and they don't know why, and then the leadership has become complicit. Now, what I want to do next is I'm going to give you a real world scenario. You all are already at tables, so you're going to work through this at your tables. And this is the setup right here. You are the principal. This is a real situation. I had this very thing happen to me. So this is just me giving you what happened to me years ago. You're the principal of a public school. In late February, a veteran teacher in your building schedules a time to meet with you. During the meeting, she expresses that the staff members are stressed out and they have 4 specific requests of you. She goes on to say that the staff have asked her to deliver this message. And so here are the 4 requests. There they are. Now, the reason I want us to look at this is because it can be difficult to know if it's an adult-centered or student-centered request. Because as you're trying to figure out, what am I dealing with here? You know, if you're a principal or you're coaching your principals and they're like, I'm not sure if my school's as student-centered as it needs to be. and you've got teachers coming to that principal making requests, it's good if we can coach them on knowing, is that an adult-centered request or is that a student-centered request? And that's the work I want you all to do right now. So at your tables, take each of these 4 and put student-centered or adult-centered by them. And then we're going to review those just in a second. All right, everybody clear on what we're doing? All right, good deal. Thank you. Okay, let's see what we've got here. So the first one is take a break. So the teacher says take a break until the end of the year from walkthroughs. The staff gets very stressed when you walk into their rooms. So what do you all think about that one?
We put adult-centered on it. But we also think, even just looking at all of them, that, you know, depending on your staff and exactly what's going on, I mean, there could always be that student-centered underneath the surface. So a lot of it's probably scenario-based, depending on who the staff member is, but we put adult-centered on that one.
Well, that's awesome. And I think he's exactly right. Your principal has to know their staff. It's not black and white on any of these, is it? I mean, that's what makes them kind of unique. I probably would do that one just as you did. How about the second one? The second one is teachers need a day to get ahead on their lesson planning. We feel like we were barely one day ahead of the kids. What do you all say about that?
We said it was adult-centered as well, because it was about them and not about what kids need.
And I think I'm right there with you. Is there a way to do that without just getting, 14 subs in the building? Because if you put 14 subs in the building, it's not about kids. So, you do want the teachers to feel like they're more than one day ahead of the kids. Is there a way, I think as a principal, you're trying to figure out, is there a way to work through that doesn't negatively affect the children? If there is, you want to try to find that solution. The third one will go right here. The teacher says, can you cancel the next several grade level and department meetings so that we have more time to grade student work, attend ARCs, and plan with each other? What do you all think about that?
We were a little divided.
Well, that's the nature of these, right? Because they're not black and white. So tell us the division.
Well, for the same reason that he said, I mean, parts of that's a broad statement. It has 3 things in it. I mean, you could look at it as we're really trying to get kids what they need in terms of feedback, or making sure that we are, planning thoughtfully. So you could look at it as that is student centered. And then you could also look at it in the same way that you looked at number 2, is you got to find that time somewhere else.
And I think the beauty of it is, as you're working with your principals in your districts, is for you to be thinking about the challenge they face about trying to run and lead in a student-centered school. And so it's a challenge. And it's not, like I said, it's not like you arrive and you don't have to worry about it anymore. You're constantly having to worry about it. And so if you're sitting down with, in Knott County, a principal, and this is the conversation, you can say, well, let's talk through that. Is it student-centered or adult-centered, what they're asking of you? And you can play it out in that regard. That's well said. Let's go to the last one. They say, can you do something to lift our spirits? Right here. Can you do something to lift our spirits?
I think we felt like it was adult driven simply because it was right along with the whole 1, 2, 3, 4. It was all about us, the teachers. You didn't see anything on there so we can better serve students. So in this specific scenario, we feel like all 4 are adult, given how it was communicated. And that, is there another scenario where this could be student driven? By all means, yes. But we didn't see any in the export up there. It was all about us, the teachers.
That's well said. That's good work there. All right, so let's move on. We've talked about student-centered versus adult-centered. And again, we're looking at the 4 internal solutions that we have to combat all of the things that are coming at us, right? We talked about all the things that are coming at us. The 4 internal solutions. The first one is to have student-centered schools, student-centered departments, transportation, food service, have a student-centered central office. It's all got to work the same. And that's the first solution. Here's the second one. A continuous improvement mindset. I don't know how many of you all have been to Toyota in Scott County, but when you go on the tour there, they use this word, I think it's pronounced Kaizen, which is actually 2 Japanese words that means continuous improvement. And so that's the second thing I want to talk to you about, is how can you in your district pursue continuous improvement. You know, in the book, Good to Great, it says good is the enemy of great. How can you pursue greatness when you're already good? I mean, that can be a challenge. And the way you do it is you've got to have a continuous improvement mindset. So here's the question. And the question has two parts to it, and they both have a psychological aspect for your staff, a very powerful one. And the question is this particular aspect of the organization where I want it as superintendent, where I want it as the chief academic officer, where I want it as a central office employee, where I want it as a principal, as a teacher, where I want it as an employee of the school district, right? As a board member, is it where I want it? And the first person's got to ask that question is the superintendent. And then the superintendent's got to guide the other stakeholders to ask that question. The kids need to be asking that question too. The parents need to be asking that question. Is it where I want it? Right? And there's only two answers. One is, yes, it is. And the other one is, no, it's not. You can say, well, no, there's maybe one where we're kind of emerging. Okay, I'll give you that you're emerging. But it's basically we're where we want to be on that, or we're not. And I'm talking about everything that you do. I'm talking about food service. And then in food service, you could break it down into menu, participation, our finances. Like if I'm food service director, I'm asking this question on like 15, 20 things. If I'm the transportation director, I'm asking this question about, are our buses safe? Are our buses mechanically sound? Are our bus drivers trained? Are we watching video so we know what the kid experience is like on the bus? There's so many different aspects of, that's what makes our job so tough, is that there are so many moving parts in a school district, right? And at any given time, some of them are working perfectly and some of them aren't working well at all. And that's just, or aren't working as well as we want them to. And that's just the nature of it. So here's the powerful thing about it. So let's say that in your district, you've got your curriculum in elementary school is aligned vertically, horizontally, and you feel really good about it. It's a celebration point, like Ralph was saying in his district. Well, what we tend to do as school superintendents, or what I've tended to do, I bet you all maybe have done this as well, is we don't stop and celebrate the things that are working. We just kind of move right on to the next thing, because the jobs are so fast that we don't stop and say, we've got to celebrate that. And, so like, let's say that you had a goal. You noticed, for example, that on MAP or iReady that your primary had been struggling across the district. And so you set a goal that we're going to see student improvement on iReady and MAP in primary. And then in a year, you start seeing that, right? So that becomes one of these things that's exactly where you want it. You're seeing kids make progress in primary on MAP or iReady. What we need to do at that moment is stop and celebrate it. Buy all those kids a t-shirt. Says something about what they just did. Have a rally at every school. Go hand those t-shirts out to those primary students. What happens psychologically when you stop and celebrate something that's exactly where you want it is the people, in this case, where I'm giving an example of what could happen in a primary that's meeting their goal on MAP or iReady. The people being the teachers and the principal and the other people who work in that elementary school, they know, number one, that was important. It was important that kids make make gains in primary on this test. And the superintendent is taking note of that, or the central office is taking note of that, or the principal's taking note of that. And then psychologically, what happens to people is they're more likely to repeat what you praise than they are to fix what you're critical of. And so if you praise something that you want to see repeated and you're intentional about praising it, there's a much greater likelihood that it will be repeated. So that's as important as fixing things that aren't exactly where you want them. Now, here's the second part of that question. If you're willing to look at things in your district that aren't where you want them to be, let's go back to food service. Let's say their participation rate has continued to decline. And you've been looking at the data and you go to the food service director and you say, we need to have a conversation about this because this is not where we want it, right? The psychological part of that is, the tough part of that is, you have to kind of train your employees to not take things personally, because what people tend to do is they tend to take it personally and they get defensive, and then they cannot continuously improve, right? You can't achieve the continuous improvement mindset unless you're open to something not being perfect and you don't take it personally. Because here's what you got to communicate to your people. It's a complex organization, 1,000 moving parts. At any given time, some of them aren't working perfectly, and that's okay. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to make excuses. We're not going to get defensive. We're not going to brush it under the rug. We're going to own it. We're going to face it. We're going to make it better. I mean, I'm in Boyle. I've been school superintendent 14 years. There are things not perfect in Boyle right now. There are things that we need to be celebrating. There are things that we need to be fixing. If I was to blame completely for that, well, then we all would be, like, every superintendent in Kentucky could say the same thing, right? We would all just be beating ourselves up continuously. What we need to do instead is say, it's okay if something's not perfect, as long as we number one, know it. So we've got some mechanism to know it, data, observation, et cetera. Number two, we don't take it personally. Number three, we make a plan. We don't make excuses, right? And so for me, this has been a big thing in my district, in my leadership. Once I kind of wandered upon or stumbled upon the idea that there are really only two kinds of things in this world. There are things that are where you want them, celebrate them. Things that are not where you want them, fix them, don't make excuses. When I came upon that, we started moving as a school district, right? Until I came upon this myself as a school superintendent, we were not. So I would say the mindset, and then trying to help all of the people you work with adopt that mindset as well. It's not enough for you just to have it as school superintendent or as principal. You need your teachers to have it. That way, if they have a bad walkthrough, you can sit down and talk about what was not good about it, right, with your teacher. But if she gets defensive every time you talk about something that's not perfect, you can't move forward. You can't be on the continuous improvement path. Okay, any questions about that? And then we're going to move straight into academics. I'm going to go right into academics, a couple of really important things about academics. But first, anything on student-centered continuous improvement. The first two internal things you can do with your teams to move them forward. Okay, let's move on to number three. Number three is creating academic excellence. How do you do that? And I'm going to tell you two ways, in my opinion, to do that. And I'm going to show you the slides to back it up. One is you have to be systematic, right? You can't have, randomness in your organization. There cannot be any randomness. It has to be systematic. The second thing is you cannot be politically correct. And I'm going to tell you how I believe we've become politically correct as educators and how it's hurt us. So we got to get rid of the political correctness and we got to get rid of the randomness. Those two things have to happen. And I'm going to show you how to do that right here. So in Boyle, we adopted this thing called a Boyle County Blueprint in 2009. I was the assistant superintendent at the time. I went in every classroom in the district, 250 classrooms, whatever it was, in the first 3 months as assistant superintendent. And what I saw was a bunch of randomness. I saw some good classrooms. I saw some not so good classrooms. I saw good classrooms for this reason. I saw other classrooms who, if they knew this stuff, it could help them. We were very random. And so I went to the superintendent and said, here's what I'm seeing. And we didn't do district walkthroughs back then. It was a new thing. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to bring 7 or 8 people per school together in something we'll call the Boyle County Leadership Academy. And then I want us to go see high-performing schools, go on some visits. I want us to bring in guest speakers who are really strong in particular areas. And he said, hey, go do it. What he didn't tell me, he was getting ready to announce his retirement. So I did it. I went and did it. And we had this great experience. There's like 50 of us. And we went, visited places. And we were probably the 70th ranked school district in Kentucky or something like that at the time. We had some pockets of excellence. We had a lot of areas that, not so good. At the end of that experience, we built a plan. We called it the Boyle County Blueprint. Now, at the end of this, after I go over the Boyle County Blueprint with you, what I'm going to ask your tables to work on, so you can have this in your mind as we go through it, is what's the difference between a blueprint and what do they call that thing where the students, you have a student, you have a plan for students, like when they graduate, profile of a graduate. What's the difference between a profile of a graduate and a blueprint? That's going to be what I'm going to ask your tables to contemplate, right? So, we built a blueprint in 2009. I became superintendent about a month after the blueprint was announced. We had our board approve the blueprint. We had every site-based council approve the blueprint. I'm getting ready to show it to you. It's been revised 3 times. Well, it was built in 2009. It was revised in 12 and 18. We've used it to direct everything, and I'll go over that just in a minute with you. Let me show you the blueprint first. So the first part of the blueprint is, what do the leaders agree to? Because in 2009, our leaders were all over the place. We worked together. We weren't a together group. We had different opinions about how to go about things. There were no agreements. So we agreed, the leadership, I'm talking about the principals and the key center office people, agreed to these 6 things. Now, these 5 things. These 5 things have not changed. They did not change in the 12 or 18 revision. But here were the 5 things we agreed to. The first was that we would embrace and communicate a culture of high expectations in which success is celebrated routinely. Remember the last slide, continuous improvement? This is the first half of continuous improvement. We agreed to that. The second was we would create opportunities for collaborative planning. At that time, math teachers in the district didn't plan together. If you were a special ed teacher working with the math teachers, you didn't plan with them. Primary teachers didn't plan together necessarily. I mean, it was just like we were all over the place. Third thing was, we will engage and lead in collaborative planning activities. Fourth one, provide training and resources to enable teachers to fully develop blueprint structures. One thing that happened once we built the blueprint, we realized 4 PD days wasn't going to do it. We upped it to 8. So we still have 8 PD days to this day, because when you see the blueprint in a minute, we couldn't train our teachers in 4 days. It took longer than that. The last one was embrace a culture of innovation where positive risk-taking is encouraged and rewarded. Our co-teaching plan came out of some positive risk-taking, right? You need people in your district taking risks, taking chances. Because remember, there's only 2 kinds of things in this world. There's things that are exactly where you want them, celebrate them. There are things that are not exactly where you want them, no excuses. If you've got something that's not where you want it, someone needs to be taking a risk on that thing, so maybe a solution can be found, right? Our leadership agreed to that in 2009. Now, this next part of our blueprint, so our blueprint is one document. It used to be on like blueprint looking paper, right? And that's the first part of it. What I just showed you about the leadership. The second part is this. This is what every classroom in the district will look like. These 8 bullets. Every district, every classroom in the district, I don't care if you're talking about AP calculus or you're talking about kindergarten, we're going to do these 8 things. Now, once we landed on these 8 things, and we landed on them by that, remember that leadership academy we created in 2009? We brought these guest speakers to us. They led us here. We went on school visits. We found it there. All those experiences together, we wrote this. Now, these 8 bullets have been revised in 12 and 18 a little bit, not a lot. This one right here, this one was added in, I think, 12. But it's pretty much the same as it was, not greatly different. Once we built it, we realized we're not doing a good enough job training our teachers. We need to have a Boyle County Teacher Academy, an induction program. When you first come to us, we teach you how to do these 8 things. They're coming from college to us, not knowing how to do them. We need to work with our university partners, the ones that are sending us kids on trying to get a little bit stronger here. We need to have a better mentor program when you first arrive in Boyle. We need more PD days, I mentioned. We're going to have to rethink the way we're spending money and spend our money here. Our calendar had to change. Like we tried to rethink everything in the district around these 8 ideas. This is what a classroom looks like. Our walkthrough form is this. Our teacher evaluation form or forms is this. Everything had to align around these expectations. This is how we'll monitor progress, because as you can tell, as I'm talking today, we're big on data. We're big on knowing if something's working or not. This speaks to, in the blueprint, how we would monitor progress. And then the last one, I think that's Marzano, but we feel like we need to be anchored in this. So at the bottom of the blueprint, we put, now it didn't have all those cute graphics. Somebody in my central office put all those cute graphics on there, but it has those 4 questions. And those 4 questions are a good place to start. What are we teaching? How do we know if kids are learning it? What do we do if they don't? What do we do if they already know it? And so we ended our blueprint with that. So here's my question to you today. How is a blueprint versus a, what was that? I can't remember the name of that other profile of a graduate. You can tell we haven't done one of those in Boyle. I'm not anti profile of a graduate. I think that's a cool idea. I've seen awesome ones. I've looked at many of them online. I've looked at, Eminence has got a really good one. I've seen some really good ones. Shelby County's got a good one. I've seen some awesome profiles of a graduate. I'm not against the idea. They're different. What I want us talking about today is what are the differences between a blueprint and a profile for a graduate. So about 5 or 10 minutes at your tables, then we'll report that back out. We'll see what you all think the differences are. All right, we'll get back to it here. Before we answer this question, though, we got Morgan County. We were having a great conversation about KSA because, I know, difference of opinion about that. And I'm sure within Morgan County, they probably have a difference of opinion about it as well. But what you said was pretty strong. And so I wanted you to say that to the group about what's the advantage of an end of the year accountability system, right? Speak to that.
So I just said that I have been that teacher who has had a struggling group of students. And the only thing I had to rely on was evidence-based practices, evidence-based instruction. And if I taught those Kentucky academic standards, I still wasn't sure how students would perform. But at the end of the day, students were very successful for me that year. And all I had to rely on was the things we're seeing in this blueprint here. So for me, I feel like the KSA is something that holds people accountable. It held me accountable as a teacher. And it gave me that validation at the end of the year that I was on the right track and that these evidence-based practices really do work the way they're supposed to work.
That's well said there. Love that. All right, let's start with this table. The difference between a profile and a blueprint. I don't know if the mic's got to get to him. You got, yeah.
The conversation we had, really the blueprint will lead to that profile of a graduate. So if you're doing everything systematically within that blueprint, it will lead to those successes for students. And that's just kind of the conversation. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, that's well said. How about this table? Let's get somebody from this table. The difference between the two.
The blueprint focuses on what we're doing, and the profile focuses on what the students are able to do as a result of that.
Man, that is great. Jerry, you got some sharp ones, buddy. There's no doubt about it. How about this table over here? Yeah. Difference between a blueprint and a profile. This table right here.
The blueprint is how we're going to get there and what we're going to do. And then the profile is the child, what they can do and how they progress.
Well said. Great job. Let's go to this table. Difference between a profile and a graduate. Yeah, either one. That's fine. The one you're at here or this one. Right there. Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay. So we had a conversation. Really, we thought about looking at the profile of a graduate gives us those characteristics or that vision of what those 21st century skills are for students. But when we think about the blueprint, we think about that as a whole systems piece with both internal and those external factors all working together. So it was kind of more, one was more of a student center and one was just an organizational structure model with all of the working parts as a continuous improvement.
That's one of the things about the profile. I think parents love that idea. So that's a great almost PR thing. If you say, we're thinking about what a student needs and we've created this profile of what a graduate will be able to do or demonstrate. I think it's really a powerful thing for your parents and your students. The blueprint, as you said, is kind of the full systems approach, right? Let's go here.
So we talked at our table, the blueprint is the systems that we have that we provide all students, which will in turn bring out what their profile is going to be, which individualizes it. So it's a systems approach that allows our students to find where they're going individually, and the system's there, but it allows them to utilize that to determine, do I want to go into welding? Do I want to be on the college track, take AP classes? And we have to be able to use that blueprint to serve them in their individual way.
Well said. And I think there's been a couple of comments very similar to that, and I like that. I want to tell you a little bit of the history about how we got to the blueprint in Boyle. I had this leadership academy, 50 people. We had guest speakers coming to us. We were out visiting high performing schools, and I was at a meeting in Fayette County, and we had a break. There were like 20 of us. We were in the boardroom there. I think it was the boardroom, and this would have been 2009. I was an assistant superintendent at the time, and Stu Silverman was there. He was Fayette County superintendent when this was going on. And so during the break, I started noticing he had this like looked like a blueprint on the wall. He had a couple of them, and I went over and I was just looking at it. I thought, well, this is awesome. And so he came over and said, "Do you like that?" I said, "Oh, I love that. I don't know exactly what it is." He started describing it to me. And so when my leadership academy got to the end, we had done all the things we wanted to do. We knew we needed to create a framework. And so I had a couple months earlier been in Fayette County, and I kind of thought that's where we need to go. Ours doesn't look exactly like Fayette's, but that's where we got the idea. So it's not like Boyle, invented the concept. But I will tell you, I hear a lot more profiles out there than I do blueprints in Kentucky. And I think profiles are great, but I think blueprints make you systematic. And so what I would encourage you to think about, I think they go together. That's what you said, right? I think over here, this table said they go together. I think they do go together. And so I would encourage you, again, not something we came up with in Boyle, but it works. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mike, I guess I'm compelled to share this, but in Simpson County, I had the same experience with Stu Silverman. Came back and took these questions and used them to, kind of be the core of how we did things around here, integrated into our culture. But then we took the profile of a graduate, kind of made that's our big picture. At the end of their experience in Simpson County schools, what do we want kids to know and be able to do to be life ready, academically, socially prepared for post-secondary training and careers? And so then we started breaking that down into, okay, at the end of kindergarten, what do they need to be able to do and know to be ready for first grade, and tried to then build that up at the end of first grade, ready for second to third, all the way to 12th grade was our life ready. And so it was all built around, what do we expect students to know and be able to do at, by that time to propel them toward that profile vision. How do we know if they're doing it? What do we do if they're falling short? What do we do if they're meeting or exceeding? And it drove everything we did, but that's how they fit together for me. And we tried to, make it a end of grade readiness that built it there systematically.
Love it. I love it. What he's saying is that the profile is the big picture and the blueprint is how you systemize it, right? Or systematize it. And so I think that's exactly right. I think we need both. Because one of the beauties of having a blueprint is it becomes really clear what your walkthroughs look like. It becomes really clear what your teacher evaluation piece looks like. It becomes really clear about how do you do teacher induction when someone's new to your district. It tells you what your calendar looks like. It tells you what your professional development needs to be. Our professional development, if I go back since 2009, has been about these 8 bullets. Those 8 bullets every year. We've been doing that just year after year after year after year. We haven't gotten distracted. You can throw something in front of us and we're like, well, that's great, but we got to do this. We're not here yet. We haven't arrived yet. So I think they're both really important. And I think we've done a good job in the state of Kentucky on the profile. Now, look, I said we haven't built a profile in Boyle. We've had meetings on it with the leadership team. We spent last summer, went pretty far, didn't get to the end game on it. We value it. We just haven't gotten there yet. I think we will eventually. But I think these two can work together very well. All right, now let me go to the next thing. This came right out of the blueprint. Okay, well then what's the step? What's a typical classroom that's not doing deeper learning, that's not heavy involved in critical thinking? What's that look like? There it is. Steps in an ideal lesson. That's what we call it in Boyle, steps in an ideal lesson. It's just simply the blueprint in a lesson plan form. That's what that is. So then it even informs what a basic lesson plan can look like. If you're a new teacher and you're like, I don't know how to build a lesson plan, well, there you go. Do these 7 things. Now, this is the part where you've got to throw political correctness out the window. And you may struggle with it. I'm just going to tell you right now, and that's okay. We're not trying to get everybody to agree with us on it, but this is what we're doing. This is how it happened. You know how they say that a leader needs to define the problem, not necessarily have the solutions? And so what I was seeing in Boyle was really low test scores for kids with IEPs, low, whether it be end of the year assessment, whether it be our nationally norm reference test, our kids with IEP were not scoring well. So I said, I'm going to go in all the classrooms. This is like 2011, maybe 12, I think it's 11. I'm going to go in all the special ed classrooms. Our resource rooms, we still had too many resource rooms. That was one thing. So I had to go in resource rooms as well. We had a lot of resource rooms. And then what I saw when it wasn't in a resource room, I saw kids sitting in rows. You know, maybe there's 25 kids in a room. You know, maybe there were 5 rows of 5. I saw the special ed teacher saying, are you paying attention? And then she would come over here. Now, are you paying attention? She was like running around the room, tapping on the desk. Are you paying attention? Like that's what she was doing. And the kids would get, the answer was they weren't paying attention. I mean, I was watching them. I was like, they're not paying attention. So I went back to my team and I said, this is probably bad. I said, we got to kill this model. I said, here's the phrase we're going to use, death to the model. I said, I don't know what we're going to replace it with, but it can't be the tap on the desk thing. You know, it can't be the tap on the desk and we got kids in resource rooms and all that. So the next step was we defined the problem to our principals. We had a principal meeting. I started out, our special ed director was there. She chimed in, our chief academic officer. They could see we were all on the same page. We didn't know how to fix it, but we knew what the problem was. And so a couple months later, I was at Junction City Elementary School. It's a school of 350 kids, 85% free reduced lunch. The principal, Pam Shunk, she had a coach, Betty Davis. Betty's now in Bullitt County, a principal there. And she's not the Betty Davis you're thinking of. It's different Betty Davis. So anyway, I was at their school doing walkthroughs, and I was in 5th grade. And when I walked in, I saw 3 people. Never saw that before. Like 3 people. There was the math teacher. There was Betty Davis. There was an aide, and then the kids every like 20 minutes were rotating. They were getting. I'll show you what they were getting. They were getting this. Whoops, right there. They were getting this, but instead of one person doing it, like instead of the 5th grade teacher doing it, the kids are sitting in rows and Betty or the IA's tapping on the desk. They divided this and said, okay, the lead teacher, you're going to do the body of the lesson. Betty's doing guided practice. They divided it up and each of them took 2 or 3 components. And then they divided the kids. Instead of the kids being 25, they were like in groups of 8 and they were rotating every 20 minutes. They were getting the same lesson, but they were getting it in 8s. So they couldn't. The question, remember, the question was, are they paying attention? They could not pay attention. If you're sitting here and just at a round table and you've got a teacher with you, you're not getting distracted, right? I was like, wow, this is crazy. So then I stayed with them longer. You know, usually do a walk through 10 or 15 minutes. I stayed a little longer. And then I went to 4th grade. It was class change time. I went to 4th grade math, and class started. 4th grade teachers there. I noticed the room looked different. It's got those 3 tables again, 3 big tables where 8 kids could sit at a table. In walks Betty Jo Davis. In walks the same IA. I saw him do the same thing. And I stayed there a long time. I was like, this is crazy. I've never seen this. So again, this is 2011 or 12. So then I went to 3rd grade. By this time, it's lunchtime. Class change again, walk in the classroom. I saw the room was set up, three big tables. I thought, is Betty Jo Davis going to walk in there? And she did. Here comes Betty Jo. Here comes that IA. They did it again. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. So I went back and told my special ed director, told my chief academic officer, you got to go see that. I think they just solved the puzzle. And so they came back. I get a little emotional talking about it. It's been a long time. They came back and agreed with me. And so we sent teachers all over the district to Junction City. And eventually Junction City became, they got like a bad name. Everybody's, oh, the pet, Junction City's the pet. Wasn't that at all. It was just that Junction City had solved the problem. And so that's the part you love hearing. Like, that's the warm fuzzy. Kids were engaged. We got it going at the high school. Kids are passing exit slips, are passing common assessments. Our data looks crazy different than it used to. I mean, I think there's a slide in here that has our data. Now, the pandemic hit us like it did everybody. I think there's a slide in here. This slide shows you. This was before we figured it out. For us, we figured it out. I'm not saying we've solved all the problems. As I said, these things are complex. You're never perfect. But before we had the co-teaching mindset, you see our data, and then you see it afterwards. And you check out this. This was the one we were trying to attack right there. And then also, that's reading right there, math right here. Right? That's the one we're trying to attack. But then as we start planning the next school year, this is where the political correctness comes in. Because what we really needed to do, we needed to have the human resources with the kids who get easily distracted, the kids who get disengaged easily. We had to push the human resources to the kids. But to do that, we had to put the kids together because we didn't have enough human resources to spread them out everywhere. Right? In other words, if we spread the kids out all over in a grade level, if you got 100 kids in a grade and you got 20, 25 who need co-teaching, let's say you got 20, and you spread them out everywhere. You put, 4 or 5 in this room, 4 or 5 in this room. Well, you can't get the human resources to them. You end up with the special ed teacher spending 15, 20 minutes here, 15, 20 minutes there. It doesn't work. We had to put the kids together. And that, we've all been taught growing up. I mean, I'm 55 years old. When I came into education, it's like, you don't do that. I mean, you were taught not to do that. And we had to do that to solve the problem. And so when people come and visit us, we get a lot of visitors primarily for this, primarily for co-teaching, primarily for gap reduction, CSI, TSI schools, right? And the thing we say to them is, look, it's in for everybody. You may philosophically be opposed to it. But what I'm saying to you is, if you're systematic, the blueprint profile of a graduate, if you're systematic and you're willing to think outside the box, you can solve complicated problems for our kids. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything here because I skipped ahead a little bit. Yes, sir.
Everybody probably can resonate with this. You talked about the school. What was their name?
Junction City.
Junction City being looked at. Oh, Junction City this, Junction City that. Animosity comes of that. How did you overcome that, or did you have any of that?
Oh, we had that 100%. That's how it works, right? I mean, we had it, and we had to get everybody at least exposed to what we were talking about. And then what we got is we got a science class at the high school that was doing this and doing it crazy good. Like, they were using the 3 stations. They were taking that steps in an ideal lesson, breaking it into the 3 stations, rotating the kids. Exit slip data went up. Common assessment data went up. Once we got them going and we had those 3 adults buying into it, we started sending people to the high school. And then when the high school's doing it, nobody's going to argue anymore. And so, what I'm saying is like, oh, the high school's doing it. Because, what happens is like a 6th grade teacher's like, oh yeah, but that's 3rd grade or whatever, it's not 6th grade. Well, now we got 11th grade science, 10th grade science. You know, what's the argument now? I mean, it works. When kids who typically get disengaged stay engaged for the full hour and a half, however long your class is, they learn at a higher level. It's just that simple. When you put them in a situation where they will get disengaged, they just tune out. It may only be 15 seconds here, 45 seconds there, but when they do that, they start losing content. And at the end of a day, at the end of a week, at the end of a month, they start failing exit slips. They start failing common assessments. If they fail your exit slips and common assessments, they're novice. That's how it works. They're going to be novice at the end of the year. So once we got our high school, Ralph, once we got them going, it kind of ended the debate. But we had to get everyone exposed first so we could find that point of light at the high school. Like, you know, we recruited them, yes, but they had to want to do it. And we had to kind of sell them on why to do it. That's a good question. Any other questions about what we did with co-teaching in Boyle? So just a few other things about engagement. I think we all know how important engagement is. Like for us and kids with IEPs, engagement's the number one variable. If you can keep them engaged, they'll pass your assessments. They won't be novice. They'll be proficient, right? We believe that 100%. And so, you know, for us, it's all about engagement. And it says here at the bottom, small group instruction increases engagement. But again, our rule of thumb is this, just so you know, elementary school, 8-1. Your centers have your centers, 8-1. Middle school, high school, 10-1. And we've got a lot of data behind that. Like, we're not just making those numbers up. But if you want to move the needle, you get, you can take 30 kids in a high school classroom, put 3 adults in there, and take the steps in an ideal lesson, break it into 3 parts, and have that lesson executed in 3 centers. Nobody gets disengaged. They pass exit slips. They pass common assessments. 10-1 works. Middle high, 8-1, elementary. That's what we found. And, provides accountability because the teacher's there with 8 kids and it's first time instructional mastery. You cannot beat first time instructional mastery. If you're having to reteach everything all the time in small groups, there's not enough time in the day. There's not enough people. You need first time mastery. Yes, sir.
Discipline data.
Oh, 100% it does. Because you think about, when does a kid say, hey, I'm going to whip you after school? It's like in the room with 25 kids and the 2 adults are over there somewhere. They're like, hey, I'm getting you, So when you put them in a table, they can't misbehave. You know what I'm saying? It all works together. It creates a better culture too for your school. The kids know someone's there caring about them because they're in close proximity to adults all day long. It works on all fronts, is what we found. All right, we're moving on. So one last piece of the puzzle I want to talk about is congruence. So what we found is this: we were moving the needle once we got all these pieces in place, but we were missing something. We're like, what are we missing? Because we're seeing progress, but we're not getting to where we think we can actually get to. And it was congruence. So if you start with a standard and you move to a learning target, I mean, we all get that process. Then you build a common assessment. But then where we were losing our congruence was in the lesson planning. Or the formative assessment was good for us, but the teacher questioning. So when we would do walkthroughs, we would see teachers asking questions below the standard. If you look at the verb, and I've included this, I mean, this is as basic as it gets, right? This is Bloom's taxonomy, the new one, but it's got the verbs right here on it. If it's an analyze, if the verb says, contrast, but the teacher's somewhere over here in the knowledge, understand level, kids won't pass the common assessment if the common assessment's aligned. Now, we made sure our common assessments are 100% aligned to the verb, so we're good there. We knew we were good there. It will tell us if we've got a problem. And we saw kids failing common assessments or not doing as well as we thought. It was because when we do walkthroughs, the questioning in the classroom by the teacher. And again, the walkthrough's the key. We believe walkthrough's the key. The evaluation, anybody can put on one good lesson. But if you don't know I'm coming in, right? And so I, as superintendent, do a lot of walkthroughs. The principals do a lot of walkthroughs. We got to see it with our own eyes. If you see the questioning is below the verb, then you've got a congruence issue, right? Student work. If you see student work on the wall outside the classroom, take a second and look at it. Look at the prompt, look at the work. Does it align? If it doesn't align, you've got a congruence issue. The engagement structures, the homework, it's all got to be lined up. If it's not lined up, there's your problem. That was kind of like one of our last hurdles to get to where we wanted to get to. And then this was the end result for us. And look what happens to the ACT. When we were 18.7, we set a goal of 22.3. It's a true story. And we got there. We thought it was a make-believe goal, honestly. And I remember when this happened, just so you know, Jerry Green and Scott Hawkins at this table, Jerry would send me, he usually still beat me. Like we would get there and I'd be like, thought we were doing something. And these two guys over here would have like 22.8 or something like that. They'd always rub it in. But the bottom line is when you pursue excellence in the classroom, systematic excellence in the classroom, and you're willing to think outside the box, even if it means you go against political correctness a little bit, you can get it done, and the kids will perform well for you. And this is what we hand our new teachers, but every teacher in the district has this. So if you see it on the left, it's learning targets. This column is called underpinnings. For us, an underpinning is the standard just below the one they're currently working on that feeds into today's standard. And so what you see a lot of times in our co-teaching room, we'll have a teacher who's doing the underpinning. We'll have the lead teacher doing the actual learning target. We'll have the special ed teacher doing the underpinning. We found that underpinnings is pretty important. We've also got key vocabulary. We've got resources. We've got games. We've got good questions. So this tells teacher, how do you ask questions that are congruent? Right there it is. We've got the exit slip right there. So if you're a new teacher to us, we hand this to you for every lesson. It's taken us years and years to build it. But we find that to be pretty important to have that in one place. And of course, Google makes it easy to do. All right. Want to take a break? Let's take a break. Any questions on this last section before we take a break? Yes, sir.
Can we get your walkthrough tool?
Yes, you can. Hey, just email me. So it's Mike, not Michael, Mike. Yeah, he asked if he can get the walkthrough tool or anything else you want. We're an open book. We'll give you anything we have. You know, and I'll say this too. We feel honored to be here presenting today. We have learned from many of the districts that are in this room and across Kentucky. We're continuing to do so. We're not a finished product. We've got things we're working on just as you do, but we're willing to share anything that we have, knowing that we may have to ask the same of you in the future. So my email is Mike, M-I-K-E, not Michael, it's Mike.LaFavers, LaFavers @boyle.kyschools.us. Just email me anything you want and we'll try to get that to you. It's a good question. Any other questions before we take a break? Yes, ma'am.
So we are here with KVEC representing the special education department. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you was when you talked about the station teaching approach, what led your district to choose that particular approach? And then did you choose that one based on being the most effective approach? And then how did you proceed with that based on, there are multiple approaches, but so how did you kind of arrive at that particular solution to your problem?
Well, you're right. And there are, when you say co-teaching, I don't know how many models are there. There's a half a dozen. Six. Okay, there you go. And you know them all. I don't know them all. But I know we've had lengthy conversations about which ones at the beginning, like we actually had at the beginning there, we were like, which ones do we feel like? What we did was we built our walkthrough form around a couple of them. And so when you build a walkthrough form and you let the teacher see this is the walkthrough form, you start seeing the ones you build it around, right? That's how it works. So we had to decide which ones were we comfortable building it around. Now, how do we arrive there was kind of the story I told you. We defined the problem from my office because we didn't know the solution, to be honest. We just knew that the tapping on the desk thing wasn't moving the kids. And then the Betty Jo Davis, Pam Shunk, the principal, That team there at Junction City figured it out. I happened to be there to see it. We sent every special ed teacher in the district to Junction until we got other models, the high school being a prominent one. And then we started sending people to that one. And then we did PD the next summer on it. How do you do it, right? And so in time, you start having all these different versions of it. One of them was parallel teaching, which was basically, I mean, it's not great. I'm not going to lie to you. Parallel teaching, in my opinion, not the best. So parallel teaching is these 7 things, but what you do is you divide the kids up into 2 groups or 3 groups. And you'll have the regular ed teacher over here. You'll have the special ed teacher over here at IA, and they're teaching the same lesson, but they're teaching it to 8 kids instead of 25. But the problem is, if it's a math class, the math certified person knows that better than anybody. Now, the special ed teacher knows how to make modifications and accommodations better than anybody. They each have their own unique thing. The IA's got their own skills to bring to the table, but if you got them all teaching math at the same time, we didn't see the data move. So we said, no more parallel teaching. Let's cut that out. And what we want the math teacher doing is the body of the lesson. Maybe the guided practice. That could be the special ed teacher, but the body of the lesson has got to be the math certified, the language arts, English certified person. And then the rest of it could be up for grabs, up for debate, right? How you land there. We came to the conclusion that underpinnings were a big deal. Kids had forgot what they learned in 3rd grade. They're sitting in 4th grade, and I got to remind them. And so we built underpinnings on every single learning target, and the special ed teacher usually is in charge of underpinnings. The other beautiful thing about it is, in a class of 24 kids, there's probably 8 of them that need to be accelerated. Remember those 4 questions? The 4th question was, what do you do if they learn it easily, right? And so if you've got kids and you're rotating these kids around, you put those 8 kids who need to be accelerated together. When they get to the special ed teacher, she does a PBL with them. She doesn't do underpinnings with those kids because those kids don't need it. She does a PBL with that group. So you get into differentiation at a level you cannot do in rows. You put 25 kids in rows, you are handcuffed in terms of differentiation. You put kids in 3/8, rotate them around, you can differentiate like crazy. We even have some kids that we're teaching the next year's standards to because they've already mastered all these. So why are we making them do it? We teach them next year's standards. So when they rotate around, that's what they're getting, right? So you can differentiate at a totally different level. Did I answer that question?
Yes, exactly. That's what I wanted to hear that conversation about, because I think sometimes we look and with co-teaching practices, there are those 6 models, but sometimes we have to think through how to kind of define which ones we're going to go with in our district and kind of filter out the ones that receive the most, yield the highest impact versus those that do not.
And
So
I think that's the key
good.
to it. Which ones yield the highest impact? And so I would say for the leaders, know which one's doing that. Know the impact through the data. And if you're seeing certain structures work for you, double down on them, right? They say a good basketball coach will call the same play until they stop it, right? If you're a superintendent, call the same play. Just call it 3rd grade here, 4th grade, 3rd grade across town. Just keep calling it same play. Yes, sir.
How, within this co-teaching model, is there some intentionality toward achieving the IEP goal and the progress monitoring that supports that? Because that's a big problem in litigation and things we providing FAPE and that type of thing. So I just wanted to hear what you had to say about
Yeah,
that.
of course, I'm not a special ed director, never have been, but we've got a good one. Her name's Margie Rush, and I mean, she'll field any questions you have like that. I think I've had 2 special ed directors during my time, been fortunate to only have 2, it's been really good. They both feel like that when you use co-teaching effectively, all the other components of special ed become easier to meet. And so I would say the sophistication about exactly the details on that,
Okay.
I would refer to them on. But I know a superintendent, when I go to them, they express confidence to me that it's become easier.
Thank you.
Other questions about this? Yes, sir.
elaborate more on your scheduling and students with IEPs, how you grouped them and things like that for the co-teaching? Was it all day or was it just for that specific time period?
Yeah, and I don't think you want to do all day. I think math and science, science and social studies, get them out, related arts, get them out. And I mean, if they're a special ed kid that does not get disengaged, put them in the regular environment. We're just talking about kids where engagement's the variable, right? So you got to know your kids. Your teachers know your kids. They know the ones, if I put them in a row, they start getting distracted, then they start filling exit slips, and don't put those kids in rows, right? That's the answer to that question. What was it? Make sure I'm answering the full question, because you said something else I wanted to get to. What was the question again?
The scheduling of IEP students for the co-teaching model for the stations, did you?
Yeah, you schedule special ed kids first, period. You schedule your special ed kids first. Yeah, I get some applause on that one. Yeah, you schedule them first. And if you schedule them first, it all works. But you got to schedule them. And here's how you schedule them. You schedule them with sophistication. You know each kid and their needs. If they don't need 3 adults in these stations, we'll put them in a classroom where there's rows and 1 adult. It's that simple. But if they need it, you give it to them, right? That's how you do it. Yes, ma'am.
Director, I figured I had a big enough mouth. But when I was a director, what I did is I went to the high school and I brought all my teachers in the conference room. I had a list of all the special education students. They provided the information that we needed. If they could handle co-teaching, we put a C by their name. If they didn't know if they were in between resource and the co-teaching, we went ahead and put them in co-teaching, because we could always have a meeting and change that. And then the ones that they could not handle the co-teaching, we had resource. So then I ended up having to make the master schedule for the high school. So our kids could be scheduled first. And that's the big key, is what you said. You have to schedule those special ed kids first.
You do.
They have to come first, or you're going to have a group of special education kids all by themselves.
You're 100% on that. And I'll say this, what I'm seeing since the pandemic is an increase in resource. Because we don't know what to do with the behaviors. And we got to solve that as the state of Kentucky. Like, that's bigger than any of us individually. I think there needs to be training on that. There needs to be thought behind that. People need to conceptualize what we need to do about that. But we got to solve that, because it's really, we're only a couple years out, since the pandemic. I mean, when it ends, I don't know, has it ended yet? I don't know what the deal is on that, right? But it hadn't been long. And we're already seeing, when I talk to superintendents, we're seeing an increased need for resource rooms. And the problem with that is your content master is that 4th grade math teacher, is that algebra teacher at the high school. The special ed teacher is just as valuable, but hers is in terms of understanding the learning needs of the kids, modifications, accommodations, et cetera, right? There needs to be a marriage between those 2 individuals. And if you resource them, the marriage becomes strained at a minimum, right? So I'm not saying there's no resource rooms, never a need for them. I'm saying we got to watch the proliferation of resource rooms. You got to watch that. Other questions on this? Jerry, I think we hit a nerve on this topic.
Thing I'm getting text about had some requests for your walkthrough instrument on here. If wouldn't mind to send that, because that's not in the handout, so they want a copy of that. And the other thing is, that would be great. I'll get it out to everyone. Please just forward it to me. I mean, there'll be no exit slips for this professional development session, because whenever you've got multiple questions right before a restroom break, that tells me how great the session is. So I'm thankful for this. And for those of you that are online, I just want to thank you for staying with us, because it shared earlier that this will be the skeletal part of your administrative retreat or your administrative team meetings for this summer for your staff and your administrators. And I was kidding with Mike before the presentation and told him that old story about Garth Brooks' dad telling him, said, son, you can always give their money back, but you can't give them their time. So don't ever waste it and give them a show they'll never forget. I don't think that anyone that's participating online or in person here has not got what we call a nugget of wisdom to take home and change lives in their district. And I'm so thankful for that. So yeah, we will take that break now, but thank you.
All right, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come right back. Thank you. All right, let's get this show back on the road. Hey, so one thing I want to show you real quick, I had a question in a group here. So this is like a very, we've got graphics that are better than this one for the station model, but this gets you the general idea, 3 groups of 8 kids in a 4th grade math classroom. And someone said, I don't have the human resources, and I totally get it. It can be difficult at times. Here's what you have to be good at, because none of us are going to have enough human resources to every time we need 3 adults in the room to get the class size or the group size down to 8 to 1. We're not always going to have that. So what do? Well, you've got to become sophisticated at the unmanned center. Now, there's different ones of these that could be the unmanned center. It might be this one. Number 3 is probably where we would put it in this. We don't always do it exactly like this. In other words, we break the steps in an ideal lesson up different ways. In the example you see here, we probably would put the unmanned center right there. In the unmanned center, you use technology. Usually the kids are taking a flashback, an exit slip. The exit slip might, if they don't do well on some of the questions, it might prompt them into a video by the teacher that she's already preloaded. So the teacher for every standards preloads tutorials. And so the kids sitting there in their little table of 8, there's no adult with them. The adults are at these other 2 tables of 8. The kids taking the exit slip, they're taking the flashback. If they're struggling, it prompts them to a video. They watch the video, then they go back to the assessment. It's like that. The key to the unmanned center takes a lot of planning to do it well. Now, there's programs you can buy. You all are familiar with the programs I'm talking about. I mean, all these different things you can buy. It already's got a component built into it. MAP does too. Descartes, I think, is MAPS. iReady's is pretty good. I was in a classroom the other day watching the teacher do it. It was pretty good. So those aren't bad for an unmanned center. The key for an unmanned center is you have to have accountability. If there's no accountability in an unmanned center, the kids will figure that out. And then it's just 20, 25 minutes of wasted time. The other thing is the unmanned center has to target part of the lesson so that the other 2, the teacher and the special ed teacher, can plow all the ground they need to plow, right? So it's got to target part of the lesson. It's got to have accountability built into it. It's got to be congruent to the learning target. You have those 3 things, the unmanned center. And I think you've got to become sophisticated at it. The only way I'd say don't worry about it is if you've got enough human resources to cover every kid in a co-teaching model that needs to be covered. If you've got that, then you don't have to worry about it. I think very few are going to find that to be the reality. Okay. Last thing I will do with you today is going to talk to you about climate and culture. Hey, before I do that though, let me show you some data real quick. We haven't updated this since the pandemic. We're working on it right now. We dipped during the pandemic. We've almost fully recovered. But this is what you want to see. Look at this. Look at this, just the first visual of this. That's what you want to see, right? That's what we wanted to see. That's what we were talking about. We want to see a steady incline in our data. That's the ACT right there. That's all the subgroups or all the different subjects. There's AP. You want an AP more exams taken and a higher pass rate. They say, well, you can't do both. Well, you can do both, because when you raise your expectations, the kids will rise to them. There's AP as well. There's MAP. So you can see the median growth percentile in MAP right there. This is, I think that's maybe state accountability there. Yeah, it's state accountability where we ranked in Kentucky. I know we're not allowed to rank anymore, but it's old data. This is achievement score, gap percentage over there on the right. We already were starting to make a move by 14, 15. So this 3 years doesn't look quite as profound. If you go back to like 11, we were like here, right? But once we started co-teaching, that changed. There's your graduation rate. I think most of our graduation rates look kind of like this, don't they? Can you believe at one time, like we had a 72? And boy, I mean, I just can't believe we did that. But all right, here we go. Last thing we're going to do, and then I'll get everybody out of here. We're going to talk about culture, because we got to build our house on the rock, not on the sand, right? And so this is a little definition about culture, but culture is the number one factor affecting student achievement. I think when you walk in a building and you get a feel, that's the climate, right? The climate usually doesn't lie to you. When you first walk in a building, you get a feel. It's usually the people who are greeting you. When you walk the building as superintendent, you know what's going on. You don't have to even go in the classrooms. You got it. You feel it, right? You feel it. If you walk in some classrooms, you for sure feel it. All these feelings together are the culture of the school. This is a little graph that kind of shows you, climate is probably the first thing you feel, but the undercurrent is what's moving the school. The undercurrent is the culture. Now, what I would like for you to do here is these are the characteristics of a toxic culture. You're not going to have to share this, by the way. I'm not going to make anybody share it. And if you're a co-op, if you're a member of the co-op, you can either score a previous school you're in or score the districts you serve, however you want to do it. Nobody's going to share it. It's your personal notes. That's toxic culture. Here's a positive culture. I'm going to come back to those in a second. So here's the scoring guide. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to give yourself a 0 if that particular thing's not represented in your district. A 1 if it's somewhat representative. A 2 if it's highly representative. You're going to do the same on positive. You're going to do a 0, a +2, a plus 1, +2. So toxic is 0, -1, -2. Positive is 0, +1, +2. I think you all have this in your handouts. You're going to score each of these. Whoops. You're going to score each of these lists. Every single item on the list, you're going to give it a 0 on this one, a 0, a -1, a -2 on all these. And this one, you're going to give it a 0 or a +1 or +2 on all of those. And then we're going to get a score for your district, for your school, for your co-op, however you want to do it. We're going to get a score. Are you positive or are you negative? The culture that you're currently serving. And then I'm going to show you what you can do about it, right? I'm going to give you like 17 strategies to deal with a negative culture. After we take this assessment, I'm not going to ask you to give me the score. So, you're just going to do this. We're going to give you maybe 10 minutes to do this. And just so you have some idea in your mind of, are we highly positive? Are we somewhat positive culture? Is it negative culture? You have some idea in your mind. So take a minute to do that. And then I'll give you the 17 strategies. All right, we're going to wrap this thing up. I will tell you this, had a question, some of the things in co-teaching, the question back to co-teaching, how do you get it started? If you've got resistance, because you could have resistance in getting it started. People may not want to start with the special ed kids in the schedule. It may not be the way they've always done it. And you know how people, they love how they've always done it, right? And so sometimes it can be a little bit of a fight. So what we did, I'll just tell you what we did. We were having the same struggles. We couldn't get traction to get co-teaching going everywhere. So we made a district grant the first year. I had the board allocate. I know funds are tight. I don't know you can do this with extra money. I don't know that you can't. I don't know. You'd have to ask KD if you could or you couldn't. But we made a grant. And back then, money was we were a little bit better shape. I mean, we're in good shape now, but we had a little bit of extra money we could play with. We set aside, I don't know, $300,000 or $400,000. And we just made a grant and said, hey, if you want an extra teacher, here's the things you got to do. And if they did those things, by the way, you know what happened? Co-teaching happened for the right kids at the right time. So basically the grant was all the systems, processes required to create scheduling, to create co-teaching next school year. If you do it, you get the grant. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Everybody did it. We gave everybody an extra teacher, right? And then after they did it a year, they all saw that the data was better. Kids are passing their exit slips. Kids are passing their unit tests. Kids are doing well on the end of the year assessments. And then the fight was over, right? Because once they do it and they know it, then the fight's over. All right. Let me show you this. I don't know, of course, as I said, I'm not going to ask you to share how you scored. Okay, so you scored yourself. By the way, here is how the scores work. +8 or higher is high positive. 1 to 7 is a productive culture. And then you can see the counterproductive toxic at the bottom. You kind of know where your culture stands of your school, your district, your organization. There's a little quote about leaders learning to read their school. And then here are the 17 strategies. I won't go through all of them. I'm going to highlight 1 or 2 per slide. I'm going to tell you this one. This one right here works. It works in 2023. If you have a school that the culture is not where you want it, create a note writing campaign for that school. Write notes like your central office with the principal. Write notes to the teachers. Write notes to the custodian. Encourage people to write notes to the kids. Like if you can write notes to the teachers, then they'll start writing notes to the kids. Start a note writing campaign where we catch each other doing good things and we write it handwritten, and just tell them specific. You got to be specific. You can't say, I appreciate all you do. I mean, you can end with that, but you got to, somewhere it's got to be, I was in your classroom the other day, or I've been in your classroom a couple of times this year. I love how the relationships you have with the kids. I love how positive you are. You're way beyond 9-to-1 positive to corrective ratio with kids. You tell them specifically, I love how I see you at all the ball games. You're so involved in the school, right? I dropped my own child off at your school the other day and you opened the door. You're just such a positive force for our school system. You write them a note and then that will become pervasive in that building, right? Superintendent writes it, chief academic officer writes it, principal writes it, write them a note. These other things will work as well. We won't spend time on all of them. Now, this one right here, the flat leadership, is good for culture. But here's the thing, here's the rule of thumb on flat leadership. So flat leadership is, I'm going to ask people's opinion on this, right? You only do it if you're willing to follow them. If it's something you're not willing to negotiate on, don't fool people. They'll know that you're not really, you're bluffing or you're fooling them. So don't act like it's flat if it's not going to be flat, right? So if as a principal, if I'm coaching a principal, I'm going to say, look, if you can't live within either one of these 2 outcomes, don't act like you can. Just make the decision, explain to them why, and roll on. If you can literally live with either of these 2 decisions, flatten it out. Let them pick. And then that does help the culture if you can do that. And so, now I will say this one, number 12, the common goals. Of course, the blueprint does that. Profile of a graduate does that. We've talked about those things today. Co-teaching does that because co-teaching says our goal is engagement. Engagement equals success. Success shows up on all the assessments. So the things we talked about today creates common goals, but there's one step further that I think we know, but sometimes we put it on the back burner and we got to take it off the back burner, and that is kids setting goals. Because I'll guarantee you most of us, as we grew up, we had someone in our life who was talking to us about our goals, right? I mean, I know I did. I bet you did too. And so when adults talk to kids about their goals, kids set goals and then they start pursuing them. Well, we need our teachers in our classrooms setting goals for the next common assessment, right? End of the year accountability. Maybe it's how I'm going to handle peer-to-peer interactions. Our kids need to be setting goals directed by our teachers, right? We gotta take goal setting super seriously. It improves the culture of a school if we as adults are all goal setters and we talk about that. So, the last piece of this is just kind of what you do with it. So if you want to go further with the culture piece, these are some ideas of what you might do with it. And that's kind of where we finish it up today. One last time, if you have any questions, if y'all saw any online you want me to address, I'm going to send Jerry Green the walkthrough forms we use. We have 2, by the way. We have the basic blueprint walkthrough form. We have the co-teaching walkthrough form. I'll send you both of those. And if there's anything else you want, just please let Jerry know. He'll get that to me, and we'll get you all anything that we have that could be helpful to you. One last round of questions before we get out of here. Well, listen, I've enjoyed it. It's been as good as I was hoping it would be driving up there this morning. Jerry's bragged on you all. I know a lot of you all before I got here. I've had a blast. I appreciate you. Good luck to you. Thank you very much.
Each of you see now, thank you. Each of you see now why we were so excited about this, or just as excited as our last presentation here. Whenever we want, and of course that was a national speaker, so we expect you to be on your way, Mike, as a national speaker next. But please write this down, or this quote. If something is important to you, you find a way. If it's not, you find an excuse. That quote to me depicts today's presentation, because everything that Mike LaFavers just shared was, if your district, if your principals, if your administrative team, if your teachers, if it's important to them, the things that he went over or shared with you today, if it's important, you'll find a way. They will find a way. If it's not, they'll find an excuse. When you get resentment for trying to push for this student-centered model, please share with your folks that it sounds as though they're going for the adult-centered excuse instead of the student-centered method of finding a way to make this happen, because it's so important. So many times we always think, okay, what's the negatives? And if we try to push for change, we try to think about, how am I going to deal with the anti-argument, or what's going to be the negative side about this said to us? If you'll notice, everything that he shared today was through the lens of being student-centered. I had a very wise man that gave me some advice, former Fort Thomas Independent Superintendent, Dr. Fred Williams. He's no longer with us, but his legacy, like many of yours, will continue to live on as educators. And he said, always make sure every time before you make any decision, you can defend that decision on the front page of tomorrow's newspaper. The way that Mike LaFavers shared every bit of this information today, going from that student-centered approach, you can defend trying to make these changes in each of your districts or schools on the front page of tomorrow's paper, regardless what the argument is against it. So the thing that we're so thrilled about is, not only did he highlight or define the problems like you were talking about leaders do earlier, Mike, you also shared ways to solve those problems. A huge problem or issue to deal with, and we know those numbers are going up, and we have enormous issues with it, is special education. And we wanted to make sure our folks and our special education team here at KVEC was involved today because of the co-teaching model and the strides that you guys have made in Boyle County. I'm just so thankful for this opportunity that we had here today with Mike LaFavers. And before you leave, I'm going to tell you the saddest, most horrible thing I know about him. That's the absolute worst thing I can think of about him. And what's saddest of all, he only has 3 months left in his current job title. He's retiring June 30th as Boyle County School Superintendent. So that's right. That's right. So I'm sure he'd be willing to help any of you later after his stint there. But that's by far the saddest thing. And what I mean for any of us, it's kind of like, once we get the job down, once we get so knowledgeable, as you observe from him today, and you just think, what a difference this guy's making in the lives of the staff members and the students and the Boyle County schools. And then snap, it's time to go. And, I'm sure that whoever they announce to take your place next week, I wish them the best, but they're probably not going to be Mike LaFavers, and I'll say that in advance. And they have some huge shoes. Right. They have some huge shoes to fill. So congratulations on a career that was well spent and making a legacy of helping others and changing others' lives. And that's the reason we wanted to offer him today, is so that each of you, everybody that participated today, can go make a difference in other people's lives. So thank you for the time. We never want to take your time unless the following day you can take things that we're training, that we're sharing here, that we're spending time learning about, that you can use immediately tomorrow. And hopefully many of those things that have bubbled to the top for you that you can use tomorrow. And you're thinking about situations where, you know, I just had this conversation with this person just yesterday, or maybe this past week, and you think, this applies to that and we can use this. Or as I mentioned earlier, we can use this for administrative staff meetings, or for our next administrative team meeting. We can highlight this and we can break this down, or we can put this framework in writing now, because we're doing parts of it, but not the whole thing. So again, thank you for spending time with us today. And it's always, I always leave here selfishly, and I'll just tell you this and try not to say but selfishly, I always feel like when I leave here, I got more out of it, and I feel ashamed of myself, because it's like, you know, you bring people in and you try to share this information. You think, well, selfishly, I got more out of it than anybody else. And I hope other people got something out of it. But it's, the other thing I feel selfish about is I always feel blessed to be around each of you each day. Every time we have a board meeting, every time we're around your staff members, and you're always learning. So we just love that culture and environment here. So thank each of you for being a part of that. Thank you, Mike LaFavers.